Welcome to Epic Begins with One Step Forward, the podcast that reveals how to plan, achieve, and enjoy the journey of creating epic results in your life, business, health, and relationships. Here's your host, best-selling author and motivational speaker, Zander Sprague.
Hello, epic people, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward. I'm your host, Zander Sprague, and today I am so honored to welcome Traci Austin to the show. Traci, hello. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Traci Austin, and I work with trade organizations on setting up human resources and talent pathways through the organization.
That is awesome. And how long have you been associated with human resources, personnel, hiring, all of it? All the different names it's had.
It has changed over time, right? So
Yeah.
in HR, so many facets to it. So my undergrad is in HR, and so 20 plus years I've been running my business, Elevated Talent Consulting, for over 7. And
Cool.
really, it's all about people. It really is all about how do we create fulfilling work for folks? And as leaders, we have an obligation to create that container, because if you're not happy at work, a lot of times that you're not happy at home. So there's some insights into that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know, having worked in the corporate world for 22 years, some of them great, some of them you're like, wow, this is not as fun a place to show up to. How important that is to create that, epic workspace for people. Look, we hope that most days people are somewhat excited to go to work. You can't be excited every day, but if most days you're like, hey, I've got a good path, I know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is so much up to the leader to create that environment. And so we all know how to complain, all right? Zander, do you know how to complain? Because I sure do.
I've been known. I've been known to, say I'm displeased with this.
Yeah. So one of the things we love to do when we're working with leaders is have them really list out all their complaints. And then we're working with them on listening into those complaints, because we believe, that every complaint is just a poorly worded request.
Sure. Absolutely. One of the things when I reflect on my time in the corporate world is I remember some great managers, and I remember managers that weren't as great. And when I reflect on that, the great managers were the ones who were actively helping me to acquire the skills that I needed, but that they needed me to have, right? I remember one of my, the manager that I think of and go, okay, that was my best manager. I was at the time doing highly technical things. I was doing software development and quality assurance, which, by the way, I was highly unqualified to do, but that's not the point here. But he came to me and said, hey, I need you to learn this skill. And it was 9 months before the intersection of where he needed me to be, so that I had enough time to acquire the skill and be competent, versus going, yeah, Zander, I'm going to need you to do this next week. And I'm like, I have no idea how to do it, So
that is a brilliant talent pathway plan of, I see you, Zander, bigger than you see yourself. And here's where I see an outcome that I believe you can be very successful at, and we've got a runway. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to me, I'm like, I manage some people in my company, and I look and say, what do I know is coming down the pipe? Where do I need someone to be? Right?
Mhm.
I need you to go. I'm giving you time. Go learn this skill, because I'm going to need you to use it. But I realize you don't have that skill right now. And I want you not only to learn it, but have time to practice it so you feel confident to go do it. Because ultimately, as an entrepreneur, my time is valuable. The people I've hired to do certain jobs, my money is valuable. I want to make sure that they're successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like what they did there is they were brilliant at creating a people strategy, meaning they knew what they needed to get a business result. So they knew where folks had to be. So you've got the talent pathway strategy, which is for the individual personally, but the people strategy is for the organization. And so many of the clients that we start to work with have no idea how to create that people strategy to get to that point where they have success with their people because they've planned for it. So that's brilliant. And the fact that you experienced that is amazing.
It really is. And then I took that. That was when I was much younger, but as I was working my way through the corporate world and stuff, I spent a lot of time doing technical instruction. I taught people how to use software for various companies. And I learned a lot in that position about self-advocacy, which I think is really a really important skill for individual employees. Understand what you're good at.
Right.
Advocate for the jobs that you're good at. And also, hard as it is, make sure that you tell your manager stuff that is not going to be like, that's not going to work out for the company. We're not going to win, no matter how much you want to do it. And specifically, I remember I was working for a company. I was literally doing an around the world training trip of like 3 weeks, going to all these different countries to deliver training. And they wanted me. They're like, there's 7 days of highly technical training. We need you to do it in 5 days. And I'm like, that's not possible. I mean,
Right.
I can deliver the material, but it won't meet the educational objective.
Right.
And I was frustrated because they're like, oh, well, can't you teach for 12 hours? I was like, I can, but again, people can only take in so much information at once. So I could say I deliver the information, but they're not going to remember it and they're going to complain. So I
That's
think me advocating, going, look, I'm not trying not to say no, but I'm telling you, you've hired me, and I know my job. I know the skills. I know what's possible. I know the outcome that we need, and that's not going to happen. So that self-advocacy is important. How do you help managers hear when employees might know more than they do?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces here, and I want to highlight something you said because it was brilliant, and I just want to make sure it comes up to the top of the surface. Is you talked about the outcomes, and there's a key distinction between the outputs put on a training and the outcome that the individual walks away and can be proficient at what they're doing. And a key part of advocacy is being able to present the information in a way that your boss, your employer, your spouse, your kid, whoever it is, can truly hear it.
Mhm.
And that kind of distinction between an output, we're going to do a podcast today, and the outcome that we create one epic thing that an individual can start with to move themselves forward. Those are two very different things. And we can do outputs all day long and never get to an outcome. And so within that advocacy, I do think it's really important that we can speak in terms of those outcomes to move that forward.
Right. To shift a little, but still talking about HR, because it's one of these things that I'm fascinated to hear your take on this, which is lots of companies have EAP programs, employee assistance programs, and yet my experience, a specific experience I had back in 1996, when I was actually working for that manager I love so much, I lost my sister. And I had 5 days of bereavement leave. That 5 days was spent helping my parents, you know, arrange. My sister was living in Chicago at the time. I was in Boston. They were in Boston. We had to get her from Chicago to Boston. We had, a funeral for her. And I went back to work because I didn't want to sit in my apartment, but I certainly was not a productive employee for
Right.
a while. although there was an EAP program, no one actually helped me access it.
Right.
And it's sort of been a bugaboo of mine for the last quarter century because I was like, someone's like, well, why didn't you use the EAP program? And I'm like, because that requires so much work on my half, and I can't. It's all I can do to make it to work. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so I guess it's twofold. What do you think about the bereavement policies for that that are currently standard? Because they certainly are not, I don't think, realistic about if someone needs bereavement leave, they're not ready to be back to work in 5 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a couple of different things on this. And I think
Mhm.
one thing with policy is when we write an employee handbook or we're writing policy, we're looking to create the black and white box, which we have to have, right? It allows us to align with what the laws are. There's some insurance type things we need to align with. But you want to write that in a way that you can still dance in the gray
Yeah.
because not every situation is the same, and there's circumstances that make each situation very, very different. So I want to name that on policy first, within that. And
Sure.
what you named is standard, right? Those 5 days, yet how they're used, when they're used, what other things go along with it. Now, are we doing some sort of, different items within that? There's so much that goes into this, but none of it starts until there's a conversation. And, management and HR, it's really, when we get down to it, about the relationships and the trust that we're building with the folks that we're working with, So I think that that's something really important within that. Do you have more on that before I jump into EAP?
No, I mean, again, I do a lot of work. Aside from the Epic, I do a lot of work with sibling survivors. I talk to companies about grief in the workplace. I actually just did it was a virtual conference, but I talked about grief in the workplace and how advocating for supporting people and understanding where they are, what's realistic, and ultimately an organization wants an employee to be able to come back and be productive. So by
Right.
supporting them during this difficult time, you actually get your employee back much sooner.
100%. And there's 5 levers of engagement that we work with clients on and we see over and over and over again. And one of those levers we call seasons of life.
Mhm.
And, losing a sibling, losing a parent, a divorce, all of those things are seasons of life. It's all a loss and a death in one way or another. And so looking at those seasons of life, it's working directly with that individual, which really is outside of a policy, right? Like you
Yes.
can't really create a seasons of life policy that states like, some of these things are about the relationship and what works and what doesn't within that. And, connecting that then into what does that individual need? What kind of support is that? Is that, there wasn't necessarily remote work at that point in time when you had that situation that you faced. There definitely is now. And really working with the individuals in order to provide them, sometimes it's structure, right? Sometimes it's saying, hey, we know you had these really high reaching stretch assignments that we're going to pull back on if you would like to. And the key here is always asking the individual what they want versus making the decision for them. So, hey, Zander, I know that you have this project right now that you're working on that's a stretch assignment, and there's been a significant life change in your family. What would you like to focus on for the next 3 months that allow us to hit X, which is a minimum outcome that's needed,
Yeah.
that allows you to be able to work on autopilot
Yeah.
versus in a stretch assignment that takes a lot more brain power?
Yeah.
Yeah, you may say, I want that stretch assignment because I don't have to think about these things. I can get an impact. But you have to be able to answer that question versus me making a decision for you, not knowing what's happening in your world. And there's no way I could.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't want to walk away from the EAP part of it because
I want to talk about this too. I'd love to tell a story about EAP.
please, please.
Okay. So I had introduced early in my career, it was my first HR manager job, and I had introduced an EAP program. And this wasn't just a dial a number EAP program. It actually had in-person counseling. So it was 5 counseling sessions with, an LPCC,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, or LP, one of them. Maybe it was a family. I don't know. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Right. A mental health professional of some sort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And so within that, it had these 5, and, I'm responsible for rolling it out. And we were, I want to say, like 3 months in. We're 3 months into this, and we brought the individual in to introduce them to the staff. So she came in and we did lunch and learns.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the key with any program is we need to remove the bias and the stigma from the programs for folks to actually want to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's happening. And then I come home from a networking event one night. It's about 8:00 at night. My husband at the time worked nights. So it was me and my 2 kids, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. I'm walking up to the front door of my house and I hear something behind me. I turn around and there's a gun to my head.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, so I do what any normal person does and I swing my purse at his head. I don't think that's what you're supposed to do, but that's what I did. But I had my keys and my phone in my hands. So he takes off running. I don't know what happened next. But anyway, long story short, I go into work the next day and I work for a nonprofit and my executive director looks at me and she's like, why are you here? And I'm like, because I have to, like, hot mess city. I'm like, I have to be.
I'm sure.
He's like, no, you need to go home, but you need to go to EAP. And what flew out of my mouth was, I'm not going to EAP. It's not for me. She's like, what? And
After
I
you were
go,
just advocating for people to access it.
so this unconscious bias that EAP isn't for me as an HR manager, as a manager, she's like, no, before you come back, you have to have an appointment with her and I need to see it. I mean, the most amazing executive director, right? So I'm like, okay. So I didn't realize that as HR, I had this bias towards EAP, that I'm advocating for others, but I didn't buy into it for myself first.
Well, and that is, I have to say, sadly, very common in, it's easy for us to say to someone else, oh my gosh, how are you staying at that job where they're not being, they're taking advantage of you, or a bad relationship, or, oh, Zander, you really I think you'd benefit from some counseling. And yet if I said, no, that's not for me. I don't need that. So I see that in my work, a lot of the stigma around mental health, which luckily we're getting a little less of it.
Yes.
And with telehealth, it's becoming a little more accessible, and, people can sit in their home. They don't have to show up and say, oh
Right.
my gosh, my neighbor saw me coming out of, the office building that houses therapists. So,
Yeah. So with this story, and part of the reason why I tell it is we all have our unconscious biases in multiple areas. And, that was such an eye-opener for me of something that I didn't even realize was a bias towards EAP. I went, quite honestly, it was phenomenal on multiple different levels.
sure.
I also took that story back and our EAP utilization numbers skyrocketed. Once we started looking at those quarterly, she's like, this is the best EAP numbers we have.
Right.
And it was because, when I was ready to share that story, don't ever share a story before you're ready for it. And that's a
Absolutely.
really important piece to it. But once that was shared, all of a sudden it became, this is okay to do. And, there were times where I said to staff that were squabbling with each other or whatever else, it is mandatory for you to go to EAP for X number of sessions.
Mhm.
And that's something that you don't always see. And it's not meant as a punishment. It's really meant, I see you bigger than you see yourself. These are things that are outside of what my training expertise is. And we have some resources here to support you. And then, ensuring at that point in time, we did have mental health as a part of the health insurance plan, which now most of them are. At that time, there wasn't, right? But that is something that's important, is ensuring that, employees do know what is the coverage that they have under their insurance beyond EAP.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just advocate so hard for company. Look, you've got this EAP program that you put in place. There are absolutely times where your employee needs to be able to access it, but they need help doing it. Because for me, I found out afterwards, like, well, what would I need to do? I went to HR and said, how would I have accessed? I would have had to ask for the list of therapists. I would have had to then go find a therapist who could see, who had room to see me. I just want to put out, you need to interview the therapist. Just because someone's available doesn't mean they're the right person. And therapy is it is an intimate relationship in terms of I'm going and I need to share some deeply personal things. I need to know that I feel like that I can trust the therapist, that I feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And
100%.
I tell that to all my new clients. I'm like, look, I may not be the right person. You will not hurt my feelings if you go, Zander, your style just isn't working for me. The same way that if we want to take something, we all have to wear a jacket, right? No matter how cool a jacket looks, you put it on. If it doesn't fit right, you're not going to buy it. Or at least you shouldn't buy it, So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now so many organizations offer coaching and there's internal coaches. It's a
It's a much different world. It really is.
Yeah. But I want to just chat a second, for the distinction between a coach and a therapist.
Oh,
They're
gosh, yes.
trained so incredibly differently. I'm a coach. I'm a coach with ICF. I have the ICF certification, and there's certain things where I can go through with a client, but guess what? The second it gets into a therapy piece, I need to make that referral out. And it's so important, that distinction. And I don't know how you describe like the distinction between a coach and a therapist, but I have a favorite one.
Okay. Well, I used to be a coach and now I'm a therapist. And I was really clear about both personally, but also in my contract about like what I could or couldn't do. And I absolutely, as a coach, had times where I was working with someone and all of a sudden, just in that coaching relationship, they reveal something that is like it's beyond what I'm able to do. I might have known how to help them just because I studied psychology and I like it and I'm, was always studying it. But I was very clear about where that line is. I've had people who now I'm a therapist go, well, can I get some coaching? And I'm like, okay, I have to say it's hard because I have so much knowledge that how do I not do therapy and just, and I'm clear about what that is and what coaching looks like because I've done it, I've studied it and stuff.
Yeah.
But you're right. But what is your story?
Yeah. So the way I like to describe it is coaching is about knowing that there's a pothole in front of you and being able to identify the pothole and learn how to drive around it so you don't drive into the pothole and then screw up your entire car because you ruined your axle because the tire's now in the pothole, depending upon how big that pothole is. And some can be huge. And therapy is more like we see there's a pothole, we're going to get in it and we're going to excavate it to fill in the potholes so we can drive over it going forward.
Yeah.
That's how I, have learned to describe it. And it's very, very different going past versus going forward. And there's a time and a place for both. And there's times you have to go backwards in order to go forwards. And there's times you can learn to drive around it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think coaching is great because sometimes you don't need a sledgehammer to fix it. And not that therapy is a sledgehammer, but therapy can be a much deeper emotional dive, whereas coaching is, Traci, let's talk about some of those, that negative self-talk, right? Like, why are you always putting down your skill set,
Right.
versus you sharing, well, I had a gun to my head.
Right.
Okay. As a coach, I'd be like, okay, that's a much bigger thing. I can't get you around that pothole.
Right. Right. Yep. And I name that in the EAP conversation because EAP does not typically provide coaching, right? But yet a lot of organizations now are providing coaching to staff. And I just want to name that distinction because it's such a gift. And, kind of how we work that is really important as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, again, it's always baffling. I'm like, okay, so company went out as a contract for an EAP program. It's supposed to be assisting me. And hopefully HR is like, hey, let us help you access. Here's how to do it. 28 years ago, that was not the case. It was all on me. I had to be incredibly proactive. And as I said, it took all my energy to get out of bed.
Mhm.
Never mind, like, hold on, now let me go find this, let me go call people. Like, seriously, it was
Yeah.
hard.
And I think that goes back to that season of life where we meet employees where they're at, right?
Yeah.
And there's certain seasons that come up where we do need to meet them where they're at. And I'll say too, a lot of HR professionals that I work with the EAP program is not the top thing that's on their list. I'm just
Oh,
going to
no,
name
no,
it.
totally.
Right?
No, I
Yeah.
totally get that. But
Um,
it is
yet,
sort of an important, it's like it is one of those things that's available. I think a lot of employees don't,
no,
they may see that, oh, there's EAP. They don't know what it is. So
right.
some education of, here's what the EAP program is, here's what you can get from it, and here's how
Yep.
to access it.
Right. So we work with clients on a lot of times we come up with our benefit broker on lunch and learns
Yeah,
of bringing in a lunch and learn once a month that really goes through the different benefits that are available, why someone would use it, the impact for them. EAP is one of them. The educational reimbursement can be one. The different parts of the insurance, whether it's prescription or whether it's mental health or, all of those things that are being paid for, but so often overlooked is an amazing best practice to have within offerings and build that into lunch and learns that really do elevate the value that is available to employees so that they feel like, hey, I know exactly where to go with this now and I've met somebody, looked them in the whites of their eyes, so I know and feel comfortable to have a conversation with this or at least a video or something like that so that there can be that personal connection.
absolutely. Absolutely. What would your advice for managers be around helping to create that epic workspace, that place where people feel valued, they understand that there is a path for them?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to actually take something that I've heard you say and put it into a format. Will that work for
Okay,
you? So,
absolutely.
you know, the complaint that I heard is that HR is not sharing EAP programs effectively with employees to know how to use it. Does that
Yeah,
feel good?
yep. I would say that's my complaint. Yes,
Yeah.
my why.
So absolutely. So for managers, I'm going to walk through kind of, hey, if you've got a complaint that comes to you, how do you figure out what's underneath it
Hmm.
so that you can come up with a solution that moves that person forward and moves the organization forward to hit an outcome, right? So I'm the HR person, right? And you're coming to me and you're saying, we're 6 months after this incident. I never knew it was there. I couldn't get out of bed.
Yeah.
What's going on with it, right? So I'm going to come into that conversation and, really set an intention for how can I support you within this, but also how can I learn where there's gaps in our system where I can best serve our employees going forward?
Right.
So I'm going to start that conversation with an intention. And guess what? We hear complaints all day long, right? All day long.
Yeah.
And so, but if we hear them as complaints, we're more likely to brush them off and roll our eyes
Hmm.
than hearing them as poorly worded requests.
Okay.
Because what I hear you saying, Zander, is your request is, how do we get this information in front of people so that they can get the help they need when they need it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I have this intention to figure out where the gaps are in our system when I meet with you. So I may say, hey, Zander, I just heard you talk about, this frustration with the EAP program. And I really want to know more about it so that I can understand exactly what you're asking for.
Right.
And then I'm going to repeat that, right? Like I'm going to listen in and then I'm going to repeat it back, listening to the facts. So, I know that, you informed us that your sister passed away on this date. I'm so sorry for that. I know we followed our policies, which was the 5 days of bereavement. That does not feel like enough.
Yep.
And then when you came back to work, we had a couple conversations that said this and this. And I'm hearing you say now that you wish we would have shared EAP with you. And you know what? I wish we would have too. Is there anything else within this that is important for me to know so that we can come up with some sort of a resolution?
Absolutely. I would feel good about that, Traci.
Because what we just did is we're creating, this is a coaching tool, right? We're creating the presence. So, Zander, you're the only person in front of me right now, and I'm creating the space to really hear what you have to say and allow you to take all the things in your head and lay it out. I'm not a therapist, right? But we're using that tool for you to feel heard and to truly be heard so that we can get to an outcome, which is that we have productive employees,
Right.
right? And then I'm going to notice what isn't being said, right? Like
Mhm.
so often it's in between the lines, and the repeating back allows us to start to fill in the gaps of what's not being said, which was essentially, it would have been really nice for you to provide that tool to me and exactly where to go and a name or two of therapists that I could have talked to during those 5 days when I was on bereavement leave. Is that correct?
Yeah, or when I got back to work,
Yeah.
I need help accessing this, even though, yes, I'm supposed to do it, but I'm unable to do that. It's
Right.
like I want to access it, but I need some help right now because it's overwhelming for me.
Right.
But
So
it's
now I might
also
So now I might say, Xander, do you still want some support accessing EAP?
absolute, yeah, and that would have been
Awesome.
great. And
So
and it,
let's go through and do that, right?
yeah, and it's also, I think it's important for managers and HR to have a good understanding of grief and how grief works. I wrote some books on sibling loss, and people will call me up and go, "Oh my gosh, my friend's sister just passed away yesterday. Where can I get the book?" And I'm like, "I'm delighted that you want the book. Now is not the time. They're not ready for my book. They need like 3 months at a minimum. Usually 3 to 6 months is when they'll be ready to read the book. One
Mhm.
day after is that's not the time." And accessing EAP is awesome, but it may not be the moment they get back from bereavement leave because they may still be processing the loss themselves and they're not ready to talk about it. And so
Yeah,
I
100%.
want, like understanding how grief works is so important to give the support that your employees need. And ultimately, my goal is help companies to get their employees back to being the productive person that they are and that the company wants and needs.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd love to add something in here and get your
Sure.
perspective on it. And that is offering things and letting the employee make the decision on when to use it. And
Absolutely.
so, and it may be, hey, we're going to offer it the first day you come back from bereavement leave to ensure that you're aware of it because someone may want it right then.
Absolutely.
For me, I needed it right then. Granted, completely different situation. Yet, I do think it's important that we ask the questions and let employees make their own decisions. And then there is a cadence of bringing things up and not a one and done, right?
So, yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say not a one and done. I might say not today, but hopefully you as HR, you as a manager, maybe you put something on your calendar that a month from now, ask Xander about, like a follow-up is really important because I may have totally been so subsumed in whatever my personal trauma is that I forgot that I can access this. But you coming back and going, hey, can we support you now? That would have been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also where it comes into we're making agreements on what those next steps are.
Yeah.
There's an and both here. And the and both is while you're working, do you still need to be somewhat productive?
Yep.
Yes. However, can we determine what that is? We're in a season of life that's probably going to produce a lower level of productivity than other seasons.
Yes.
And guess what? We're going to have that, but it does not negate or, make it so you just don't have to perform or you can just be there, but not at all present and not performing. And that's a really important line that comes with some great definitions and boundaries and collaboration. And I just want to name that because it's something that comes up quite frequently. And there is a way to hold someone while still having clear expectations about the outcomes that need to happen because they are still at work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Traci, this has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared. If people want to find you, get a hold of you, their company needs your help, how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I also have a podcast called the People Strategy Podcast. So you can find us on all of the podcast platforms. And we're also on LinkedIn. So Traci Austin on LinkedIn with Elevated Talent Consulting.
Awesome. Traci, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Zander.
And as always, I want to remind people that if you're ready to begin your epic journey, go to epicbegins.com. And remember, epic choices lead to the epic life that you want.
Get your gift copy of the award-winning book, Epic Begins with One Step Forward, at epicbegins.com. That's a wrap on this episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward with your host, Zander Sprague, best-selling author, internationally acclaimed public speaker, and licensed professional clinical counselor. To make your next conference or event epic, send an email to Zander at zander@epicbegins.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Remember, epic choices, epic life.